Hello and welcome to Quiz Class. I'm your host Ellen, and today we have 100 questions on general knowledge. Let's take a look at our Quiz Class awards. Let us know how you rank in the comments at the end, along with the answer to the bonus question. And let's begin. Which experimental novel by B.S. Johnson was published in 1969 as a book in a box? The Unfortunates, House of Leaves, or Hopscotch? The Unfortunates. What name was given to the mid-1980s manufacturing process that combined traditional Japanese management philosophy with computerization? Kanban system, just-in-time production, or lean manufacturing? Lean manufacturing. Which early 20th century art movement created ready-mades and valued randomness with artists like Marcel Duchamp? Surrealism, Dada, or Constructivism? Dada. What cultural practice did anthropologist Bronislaw Malinowski famously study in the Trobriand Islands during the 1910s? Kula Ring Exchange, Firewalking, or Samuel Taylor Coleridge? Kula Ring Exchange. Which 1990s software innovation was called improv and revolutionized data visualization before being commercially overshadowed? Lotus Spreadsheet Alternative, Apple's first video editing program, or a database competitor? Lotus Spreadsheet Alternative. What architectural term describes a decorative element that visually breaks a roof silhouette, often containing windows? Dormer, cupola, or clerestory? Dormer. Which 1950s radio program featured Gene Shepard and pioneered a form of spoken word storytelling that influenced modern podcasting? Night People, The Shadow, or Dimension X? Night People. What name was given to the 1970s linguistics phenomena where certain American dialects underwent systematic vowel shifts? Northern Cities Vowel Shift, Great Vowel Migration, or Urban Dialect Transformation? Northern Cities Vowel Shift. Which 1940s technological innovation was nicknamed the monstrosity by its creators before being officially unveiled? The ENIAC computer, the atomic bomb, or the Polaroid camera? The ENIAC computer. What traditional Japanese theater form combines highly stylized movement, elaborate makeup, and symbolic gestures with no speaking? No, Buto, or Kabuki? Buto. Which early home recording technology of the 80s was marketed with the slogan, "Say it with pictures"? Fisher-Price, Polaroid Spectra, or the Sony Watchman? The Fisher-Price Pixel 2000. What architectural style, popular in 1920s, 1930s America, featured zigzag forms, bold colors, and geometric patterns? Streamline Moderne, Art Deco, or Bauhaus? Art Deco. Which psychological experiment measured participants' willingness to obey authority figures done in the early 60s? Obedience to authority experiment, the Stanford Prison experiment, or Robbers Cave experiment? Obedience to authority experiment. What textile manufacturing technique involves creating patterns by selectively preventing dye from reaching parts of the fabric? Resist dyeing, screen printing, or jacquard weaving? Resist dyeing. Which pre-digital photographic process produced blue images on specialized paper? Cyanotype, daguerreotype, or ambrotype? Cyanotype. What 1980s financial innovation combined multiple mortgages into tradable securities? Junk bonds, credit default swaps, or mortgage-backed securities? Mortgage-backed securities. Which traditional Mexican ritual celebration dating back to Aztec times honors deceased family members? Dia de los Muertos, Las Posadas, or Cinco de Mayo? Dia de los Muertos. What philosophical movement, developed in 50s France, examined how meaning is constructed through signs and relationships? Structuralism, logical positivism, or phenomenology? Structuralism. Which experimental music composition by John Cage consists of 4 minutes and 33 seconds of performed silence? 4 minutes, 33 seconds, Imaginary Landscape, or Sonatas and Interludes? 4 minutes, 33 seconds. What ethnographic research method requires researchers to immerse themselves in the community they're studying? Controlled experiment, quantitative analysis, or participant observation? Participant observation. Which 1950s design collective founded in London rejected commercial mass production in favor of handcrafted furniture? Omega Workshops, Bauhaus, or Crafts Council? Crafts Council. What culinary technique involves cooking food slowly in its own fat at low temperatures? Confit, braising, or poaching? Confit. Which early computing system developed in the 70s was designed for non-technical users at Xerox PARC? Lisa, Alto, or VAX? Alto. What economic theory associated with John Maynard Keynes advocates for government intervention during economic downturns? Supply-side economics, Keynesian economics, or monetarism? Keynesian economics. Which 1960s literary movement featured authors like William S. Burroughs and used techniques like cut-up to create non-linear narratives? Beat Generation, New Journalism, or Magical Realism? Beat Generation. What geological process forms natural arches and hoodoos through the selective erosion of rock? Differential weathering, plate tectonics, or glacial retreat? Differential weathering. Which 1990s virtual pet created in Japan required feeding and care through a small handheld device? Furby, Digimon, or Tamagotchi? Tamagotchi. What cognitive bias causes people to seek information that confirms their existing beliefs? Confirmation bias, the Dunning-Kruger effect, or availability heuristic? Confirmation bias. Which traditional bread-making technique uses natural fermentation and wild yeasts? Biga, Polish, or sourdough? Sourdough. What 1960s architectural movement proposed walking cities and plug-in urban modules? Metabolism, neo-futurism, or brutalism? Neo-futurism. Which early digital music storage format used magnetic tape cartridges and was popular in the 80s? Minidisc, digital audio tape, or DCC? Digital audio tape. What sociological concept describes when deviant behavior increases after being labeled as such? Labeling theory, strain theory, or differential association? Labeling theory. Which traditional Japanese concept refers to the beauty of imperfection and transience? Mono no aware, ikigai, or wabi sabi? Wabi sabi. What early video display technology from the 1960s used phosphor-coated tubes to show individual characters? Vector display, the plasma panel, or CRT terminal? CRT terminal. Which philosophical concept suggests that modern society has replaced reality with symbols and signs? Simulacra, deconstruction, or dialectic? Simulacra. What specialized 1970s footwear was created specifically for skateboarding with reinforced heels? Nike Cortez, Vans Era, or Puma Clyde? Vans Era. Which anthropological term describes objects or ideas from one culture adopted by another? Cultural appropriation, cultural diffusion, or cultural relativism? Cultural diffusion. What 1950s photographic technique involved triggering high-speed flashbulbs to capture incredibly fast movements? Stroboscopic, time-lapse, or multiple exposure? Stroboscopic. Which 1980s mathematical discovery proved a centuries-old conjecture about the optimal stacking of spheres? The Kepler conjecture proof, four-color theorem, or Mandelbrot set? Kepler conjecture proof. What hand-weaving technique creates patterns by manipulating supplementary weft threads? Brocade, ikat, or tapestry? Brocade. Which ancient Greek concept describes the right moment or opportune time for action? Chronos, kairos, or aeon? Kairos. What 1970s cultural movement combined science fiction themes with funk and psychedelic elements in music? P-funk, space rock, or krautrock? P-funk. Which cognitive theory describes how children construct mental models of the world? Constructivism, behaviorism, or attachment theory? Constructivism. What molecular gastronomy technique involves spherifying liquids with caviar-like beads? Vacuum infusion, foam emulsification, or reverse spherification? Reverse spherification. Which 1990s computational technique was inspired by biological neurosystems? Fuzzy logic, genetic algorithms, or neural networks? Neural networks. What traditional Korean preserved food relies on fermentation of vegetables with seasonings? Kimchi, tempeh, or kombucha? Kimchi. Which 1960s art movement emphasized minimalist installations and environmental interactions? Pop art, land art, or op art? Land art. What linguistic process involves changing a word's pronunciation to make it more similar to nearby sounds? Assimilation, metathesis, or elision? Assimilation. Which early computing storage medium used punch paper cards based on Jacquard loom technology? Hollerith cards, magnetic tape, or punch tape? Hollerith cards. What traditional Japanese ink painting technique emphasizes minimalism and spontaneous brushwork? Nihonga, ukiyo-e, or sumi-e? Sumi-e. Which early internet community provided email, forums, and games through dial-up connections? CompuServe, The Well, or Prodigy? The Well. What documentary filmmaking approach attempted to capture reality without narrator intervention? Direct cinema, cinema verite, or docudrama? Cinema verite. Which philosophical concept proposed by Thomas Kuhn describes revolutionary changes in scientific thought? Paradigm shift, falsification, or positivism? Paradigm shift. What traditional food preservation technique uses smoke to extend shelf life and add flavor? Confit, cold smoking, or curing? Cold smoking. Which 1970s electronic music instrument was the first to use digital sampling technology? Fairlight CMI, Mini Moog, or Prophet 5? Fairlight CMI. What sociological concept describes when individuals reject cultural goals or the means to achieve them? Alienation, anomie, or deviance? Anomie. Which pre-modern architectural feature uses corbelling techniques to span spaces without true arches? Flying buttress, squinch, or pseudo vault? Pseudo vault. What specialized 1980s computer peripheral allowed artists to draw directly on screen with a stylus? Graphics tablet, light pen, or trackball? Graphics tablet. Which rhetorical device involves asking a question that implies its own answer? Hypophora, epiplexis, or rhetorical question? Rhetorical question. What mathematical concept describes a curve that approaches a line but never reaches it? Hyperbola, parabola, or asymptote? Asymptote. Which early digital photography storage format was introduced by Sony in 1998? Smart Media, Memory Stick, or Compact Flash? Memory Stick. What archaeological technique uses water to gently separate artifacts from surrounding soil? Flotation, stratigraphy, or ground-penetrating radar? Flotation. Which 1950s cooking innovation combined microwave technology with conventional heating? Induction cooktop, radar range, or convection top? Convection oven. Radar range. What traditional Polynesian navigation technique relies on reading stars, currents, and wildlife patterns? Wayfinding, celestial mapping, or quadrant positioning? Wayfinding. Which biological process allows certain animals to survive in a state of dramatically reduced metabolism? Torpor, estivation, or diapause? Torpor. What textile printing technique uses wax to resist dye penetration, creating patterns when the wax cracks? Block printing, batik, or screen printing? Batik. Which early computer networking protocol developed in the 1970s allowed transfer of files between different systems? UUCP, ARPANET, or TCP/IP? UUCP. What philosophical approach focuses on the structures of first-person experience? Existentialism, hermeneutics, or phenomenology? Phenomenology. Which 1990s audio technology compressed music files by removing sounds inaudible to humans? WAV, MP3, or MIDI? MP3. What architectural principle creates the illusion of greater length by gradually decreasing column spacing? Entasis, golden ratio, or forced perspective? Entasis. Which 1980s cybersecurity term describes software designed to self-replicate and spread between computers? Trojan horse, computer worm, or logic bomb? Computer worm. What geological process creates natural glass from lightning strikes to sand? Metamorphism, fulgurite formation, or vitrification? Fulgurite formation. Which 1970s dance style originated in New York City with breaking, popping, and locking? Breaking, Vogue, or house? Breaking. What cognitive fallacy occurs when people believe others notice their appearance or behavior more than they actually do? Spotlight effect, fundamental attribution error, or curse of knowledge? Spotlight effect. Which traditional Middle Eastern musical scale system organizes melodies around specific modes? Halog, raga, or makam? Makam. What 1990s computer technology allowed multiple operating systems to run simultaneously on one machine? Multiprocessing, distributed computing, or virtual machine? Virtual machine. Which linguistic feature describes how language varieties change systematically along geographical transitions? Diglossia, code switching, or dialect continuum? Dialect continuum. What cooking technique involves sealing ingredients in parchment paper or foil packets? Confit, sous vide, or en papillote? En papillote. Which early video game released in 1962 featured two rectangles and a dot on an oscilloscope? Tennis for Two, Space War, or Pong? Space War. What psychological principle suggests that people have a fixed amount of willpower that depletes with use? Cognitive dissonance, ego depletion, or decision fatigue? Ego depletion. Which traditional Japanese craft involves folding paper into decorative shapes? Origami, ikebana, or kintsugi? Origami. What 1970s architectural preservation movement fought to save historic buildings from demolition? Adaptive reuse, new urbanism, or postmodernism? Adaptive reuse. Which computing concept allowed multiple users to simultaneously access a central computer, pioneered in the 60s? Time sharing, batch processing, or distributed computing? Time sharing. What cultural term describes the unwritten rules and shared assumptions within a society? Social contract, cultural capital, or tacit knowledge? Tacit knowledge. Which 1980s audio technology allowed electronic instruments to communicate with each other using standardized signals? MIDI, PSM, or DSP? MIDI. What traditional Chinese martial art emphasizes slow flowing movements and is practiced for health benefits? Tai Chi, Wing Chun, or Bagua? Tai Chi. Which philosophical position holds that the mind and body are fundamentally different substances? Physicalism, dualism, or monism? Dualism. What ecological concept describes how a single species can dramatically alter its environment? Indicator species, keystone species, or ecosystem engineer? Ecosystem engineer. Which 1950s literary movement led by the San Francisco Renaissance rejected conventional writing structures? Confessional poetry, Beat Generation, or New Criticism? Beat Generation. What architectural term describes a decorative feature consisting of carved or applied ornament? Finial, grotesque, or modillon? Grotesque. Which early internet communication system used dial-up bulletin boards for messaging? BBS, Usenet, or ARPANET? BBS. What cognitive process involves improving memory by organizing information into meaningful groups? Method of Loki, chunking, or mnemonics? Chunking. Which traditional Indian musical concept divides an octave into 22 microtones? Raga, Shruti, or Tala? Shruti. What architectural principle associated with Louis Sullivan suggests that form should follow function? Minimalism, functionalism, or organicism? Functionalism. Which 1970s communication protocol allowed computers to transfer data over phone lines? TCP/IP, Token Ring, or X25? X25. What psychological effect describes improved memory for information that relates to oneself? Von Restorff effect, serial position effect, or self-reference effect? Self-reference effect. Which traditional Mediterranean building technique uses lime plaster over stone walls? Tadalakt, rammed earth, or cob construction? Tadalakt. What early digital animation technique pioneered in the 80s created fluid motion by drawing intermediate frames? Tweening, rotoscope, or cell animation? Tweening. Which philosophical concept describes the mode of being that is peculiar to humans? Noumenon, Dasein, or Elan Vital? Dasein. What specialized 1980s computer memory technology stored data even when power was removed? DRAM, DRAM, or NVRAM? NVRAM. And our bonus question, what term was coined in the 1960s to describe the increased homogenization of culture due to mass media and consumer products? Let us know the answer in the comments, as well as how you did with our quiz class Einstein rewards. Thanks for playing, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.